Joining from the NLP Logix AI Collaborate 2022 conference in Ponte Vedra, Florida, we have Josh McFarlin of AirPro.
So Josh, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being here.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dan.
Good to have you in with us in the series. We're going to be diving into your AI journey, which is sort of the purpose of these episodes. But before we do, I'd love to get some context just for the listeners who are going to be less familiar with what you do on a day-to-day basis as to what is the business you're in and the problems that you, Josh, and your team are day-to-day working on. That'll be the context to start with.
Sure thing. So I'm here representing AirPro Diagnostics. AirPro Diagnostics is a remote diagnostics provider. Our primary customers are the collision repair and glass replacement service providers in the industry. So think automotive. And, if you've got a vehicle that has either been in an accident or needs to have the glass replaced, you're taking it to one of those two customers of ours. They'll have on their end a tool that we place in their facility. They will plug that in and turn it on, and that's where we take over. And so if you think about it in terms of historically what they're used to dealing with, it's the glass, the paint, the plastic, the metal, et cetera, and not so much the electronics. And so that's where we come in. We're there to kind of supplement their capabilities. And so we've got a large number of brand specialist diagnosticians or brand specialist technicians that can log into that tool remotely, sort of like a remote IT help desk, and perform whatever procedures need to be performed. As it relates to AI and NLP Logix, where that comes into play is a new product that we brought to the marketplace. We refer to it as Auggie, A-U-G-G-I-E, Auggie. And Auggie is a forward-facing camera solution that is a better mousetrap, if you will, than the standard process for calibrating forward-facing cameras. Forward-facing cameras would be found just behind the windshield alongside of your rear view mirror, and they're used in collision avoidance and lane keep assist and a lot of the new advanced driver assistance systems or ADAS systems. And so they need to be calibrated anytime there's a glass that gets replaced or a camera that gets replaced or an accident, and sometimes even something as simple as a four-wheel alignment. And so we're here to help make that process a little easier.
Got it. Okay, so we have a product suite. You have kind of the main customers that you're working on and working with. And now there is the question of what sort of brought artificial intelligence to the forefront. There's probably many, many people working in your industry who are really not necessarily developing new products with AI. Clearly you are. What got you guys to cross that threshold and say, hey, we think this is the right tool for the job and the right move for us as a company?
So for us, it was a combination of pieces. We had the concept of how Auggie would work. And I'll try and give you a quick visual here, or describe a quick visual of what the standard process is. And it's to take a target and place it out in front of the vehicle at a distance of, let's say, 15 to 20 feet. It kind of depends on the manufacturer. And you have to take some very precise measurements and display this target in very specific environmental conditions, like a perfectly level floor, walls with nothing on them, no other obstructions. And you need a footprint in this area that on average is 30 by 60 feet. That's a big square footage to give up in a shop where every square foot needs to be productive. And So we came along and we said, okay, we think we can take that target and scale it down and place it on the windshield. Well, that part's fairly easy to test and validate. The ability to scale that target by vehicle, by model, and do that over and over again without having to precisely place the tool meant that we needed machine vision, machine learning, and some AI components in the mix in order to make that user-friendly for the end user.
Got it. And so give us a sense here in terms of shrinking this device down. Where did computer vision play a critical role in actually making that happen? I can sort of imagine here, but again, you've been doing a good job of painting the visual picture. Where did CV sort of fit into the product suite, into the user's actual workflow to really add value in this case?
So if you think about if you think about taking kind of a laptop or a tablet or something, and you're holding it up in front of the vehicle, and it's sort of positioned on the windshield in front of the camera, that's fairly easy and straightforward to set up. But now what we need to do is we need to establish the relationship between this tablet, or in our case, the Augie, and the forward-facing camera lens that's sitting behind the windshield. And so in order to determine that relationship, there's a few things that we have to do. We have to calculate roll, pitch, yaw, and distance between the Augie and the vehicle and the camera. And then we also need to actually find the camera lens. And that's where the computer vision or machine vision comes into play, because we've trained it to go look for the camera lens. And then once it finds it, it can establish the physical relationship between the Augie and the vehicle.
Got it. Okay. So it's essentially placing two objects in space with computer vision is sort of the bulk of what this CV application is doing, or is there anything else that's important to understand about kind of its core job here?
So the Augie understands what its dimensions are. Once it understands the dimensions between it and the vehicle, it can then scale the target and display the target with the correct perspective for the camera. So if you think about, here's a kind of a simple analogy. We've got two different vehicles. One has the camera on the center line of the vehicle. So it's running right down the center of the vehicle behind the glass. The other one, it's offset off the center line by 20 millimeters. The perspective of how the camera sees the target out in front of the vehicle is different for those two cameras. So from one, it's seeing it just off the center line. The other one, it's seeing it directly on the center line. But the target consistently is placed on the center line of the vehicle out in front of it. And so we have to control for that perspective so that you're seeing it at an angle, if you will. Even though it's a two-dimensional target on an LED screen, we have to skew the target so that it's seeing it at the correct perspective. Does that help to kind of illustrate that?
Got it. And now I think it's useful to understand, I guess, the outcome for the user here. You've already articulated that saving space in a small shop where every square foot counts is a big value unto itself. I presume with computer vision making some of these adjustments by itself, there's also a time-saving efficiency component. But when you think about the biggest kind of needle you're trying to move in terms of metrics here with this application, what are those needles? What are those metrics that honestly matter most to you folks and to your customers?
Sure. So I'd say there's three. The first one is the overall space requirements, just because that can be very hard to come by. The second one is time. The typical full-size calibration, let's say, runs on average 30 to 35 minutes. The typical Augie calibration for somebody who's done it a few times, so again, we're getting to an average here, we're at speed, if you will, is running 5 or 6 minutes. So pretty significant time savings in a process where every minute counts. And then the third piece would be accuracy. And if I may, I'd like to kind of give another quick kind of describe another visual there about the accuracy. So when you're calibrating a camera, the camera has to have a tolerance of what it will accept, because the whole point of the calibration is to train the vehicle software how to see through that camera and interpret its surroundings, recognizing that one camera lens and the next camera lens might see the world just a little bit differently. And so you're teaching it how to see through that camera and see accurately. So when you go place that target out in front of the vehicle, the easiest kind of visual analogy I've come up with is picture an 85-inch TV on your wall, an 85-inch flat screen TV hanging on your wall. That's the target tolerance that we're working with. And then the target itself is, let's say, a 40-inch TV, and it just needs to live somewhere within that 85-inch frame. Ideally, it lives in the dead center of that frame, right? So top, bottom, left, right, it's living right in the middle. The 40-inch TV is centered right inside of that 85-inch box. But the software will accept it as long as it's somewhere in that box. So you could be in the top left corner or in the bottom right corner or just left justified or right justified, and you're going to get a successful calibration. The software will say, I found the target, successful, go drive the vehicle. When you go drive the vehicle, those systems aren't going to perform correctly. So if you've got lane keep assist, where the vehicle will actually actively steer you back to the center of the lane when you start to drift one way or the other, that lane keep assist may now actually actively keep you on the white line instead of actively keeping you between the white lines.
Okay, so and this would be let's talk about the consequences of if that occurred.
Sure thing. So if that system isn't working correctly, best case scenario, you're dealing with lane keep assist or lane departure warning, where maybe it's just going to keep you a little bit off center in the lane. Worst case scenario, you're dealing with pre-collision warnings or auto emergency braking or something along those lines, where you're counting on this system to intervene when you're not paying enough attention. And now you've got a system that isn't going to perform as it should in an emergency situation. So in that example, let's just say that you've trained the camera to look to the left-hand side of that target that I just described a moment ago. You're driving down the highway, you're in the right-hand lane, traffic in the left-hand lane, for whatever reason, is stopped. You've trained the camera to look to the left by accident, but that's where it's looking. It sees that stopped traffic. That your vehicle may now decide that it needs to go into an emergency braking situation in order to try and stop, because it believes that you're headed directly towards that stopped traffic. And now, even though you're in a lane that has the ability to keep driving, your vehicle is intervening and putting you into a panic stop, which may then result in the traffic behind you running into you. That's kind of the extreme example of just how far this can go astray.
Got it. Okay, so there's a paramount emphasis on kind of the accuracy side of things. You've kind of full-blown taken a whole separate checkpoint just to touch in on accuracy. When it comes to what you folks have done to ensure it, given those consequences at hand, what have been the steps on the technology, on the process side? What have you folks worked on, I guess, to address the relative urgency there? So
this is something that we've been working on for almost 4 years now. And we've done an enormous amount of testing with, we're talking thousands of calibrations. The struggle is because the software will tell you that you got a successful calibration, even if you gave it bad input. And you can do it on purpose. You can intentionally skew the input, get a successful calibration, and go drive the vehicle. And so the only way to really determine whether or not it's performing correctly is to go drive the vehicle and verify the operation of the systems. Again, we're not going out and putting it into, an auto emergency braking situation. We're going to rely on systems like lane keep assist, where it actively steers you back to the center of the lane, or lane departure warning, where it makes a noise or it'll vibrate your seat or something like that as you start to actually drift towards one of the white lines. And so we use those systems as a way to validate that it's performing correctly. And what we found is, in many cases, a vehicle that came to us with a known good calibration where the customer was happy with the performance, et cetera, we were able to improve on that by going through our process. Because if at full scale, the tolerance for the 85-inch TV and the 40-inch TV kind of sitting inside of it, and I'm using that as an analogy, that those dimensions may not be accurate, but when we start to bring that target in, we have to scale in that tolerance as well. So, if it was 85 and 40 out there at full distance, and I'm purely just making up numbers at this point, it may be, a 15-inch target with a 5-inch, or, a 15-inch tolerance with a 5-inch target by the time we've scaled it in. The room for error there has also decreased quite a bit, the tolerance for what it'll accept.
Yeah, okay, got it. So it sounds like this has been years in the making. Is this since well ahead of your early AI journey, that this sort of these developments around accuracy?
Yeah, so our initial testing was we are dealing with paper printed targets and kind of an adjustable rig that we could mount on the windshield, et cetera, as a proof of concept, et cetera. We engaged with NLP and got involved in the AI side of things at about a year and a half ago.
Got it. Okay. So a lot of good existing process level efforts, and now it's about sort of leveling that up with tech. And clearly there was a vision in mind here. I mean, it's quite evident that you guys have had a roadmap that has mattered a lot for your customer standpoint, from your product development standpoint, that NLP Logix has sort of fit into as a partner. This takes us to sort of our last question around where this brings you into the future. So there's this set of products that can now become more powerful, hopefully much more accurate. There's impacts that we've been able to tease out in terms of why they're so relevant for your customers and for your business. This is probably part of a broader swath of efforts of kind of unlocking AI capability. When you think about what your product is capable of today, and then you think about what will it be capable of 2, 3, 5 years from now, if we can keep getting value from data, keep leveraging these cutting edge technologies, what is the vision that you're working towards? Because I think that would be useful and interesting for some of the listeners here.
Sure. So just to clarify, there's a couple of elements where we're using it now. And those elements are initially determining the relationship between the Augie and the vehicle, like I described earlier. Next, using machine vision to locate the actual camera lens. Next, after that would be the algorithm that needs to run based on that data that it's collected so that it can scale the target correctly. But before we ever get to any of that, there's a calibration process that has to occur for the Augie itself. And that's at the end of manufacturing for Augie. So we finish putting one of these together. It's got an onboard camera. We need to understand how it sees the world through that camera. And so NLP Logix has been part of that process as well to go through and perform that initial calibration. Where do we go from here? It's going to be continuing to refine this process and make it faster, increase the accuracy as, even if we're talking, by tenths of a percentage point. Any little increase is always a good thing. And so the speed is very important. The next complexity, though, has to do with the vehicles are constantly changing. So just because we've gotten it to work and it's working very well on model years 2015 through 2022, the manufacturers aren't going to continue to do things the same way. So just because we've been able to be successful with the makes and models that are using these systems to date, they're constantly changing. Something as simple as changing the shape of the camera lens is going to require us to stay on top of that. And we're going to have to retrain the model to be able to determine the location of that new camera lens. And it's just it's an ongoing process as we evolve into other markets. Just because we're working well on a Nissan Altima here in the US doesn't mean that we're going to work well on the Nissan Altima found in the UK or in Asia Pacific regions. Those models may be different. The location of the camera will be different. So there's a constant kind of ongoing learning that we have to do about all of this as we go forward.
Yeah, so the lessons will never end. Even if the technology could freeze in place, the environment you're going to operate in is going to force you to adapt and change. So that it sounds like probably a reality that many of the people tuned in can appreciate. Very few components of business inputs and outputs are going to freeze in time for a whole decade. I guess a last question we can end on here a little bit, Josh, and think about some of the components of your journey. You've had a product roadmap and vision in terms of how you folks are serving the market that, as you had mentioned, just one piece of it has been a 4-year path here. So there is a direction. AI has started to fit in and become part of that trajectory for you guys and has shown some promise. What advice would you have for other business leaders who are thinking about where do I get started with AI projects that can really add value, maybe be the best first step for the business? Nobody wants to do AI for its own sake, but you've clearly not done that. You've had a much smarter strategy. What is that kind of parting advice that you would have for other leaders listening in?
I think the first thing would be that you need to be willing to kind of get out of your comfort zone a little bit to think outside of the box. because there's definitely elements of this project that, as much as we've tried to think it through and have a plan and a roadmap, et cetera, there's elements of this project that we didn't see coming. We didn't know to expect or plan for. And so because we're kind of blazing a new trail, so to speak, we had to have our eyes open. But more importantly, we needed to have a partner that we could work with that would help us to see that and help us to kind of figure out which way is the best way to go about it. Let's just use machine vision as one example. There's multiple different models for machine vision in identifying an object. And so determining which one of those models was the right model to use for our particular project wasn't something that anybody on our staff had the inherent knowledge to know how to select. But we were able to work with NLP Logix and the experts on their team and come up with the right model that fits us best. And some of that was trial and error. Some of that was based on prior experience. So I think the more that you can do to have the right expertise as part of the project and not be contained by the process, but be willing to think outside the box and say, wouldn't it be great if we could, go down this path and think in these terms about this other way of dealing with this problem is, I think, equally important.
Got it. Okay. So being willing to be open-minded and flexible. I think that your notion here, we can end on this, of sort of having the right expertise in the room is a really important transferable lesson, Josh, for folks. That sounds like the way that we think about it. Sometimes we hear leaders talk about it as we've got to have our technical sort of data science savvy folks in the room who maybe have their hands on the data. We've got to have our subject matter experts that know the domain space really well. They know the inputs, the outputs, the business outcomes, the workflows, and then potentially also somebody from the business side who knows how much is this worth actually spending on? What are we really willing to commit to strategically here? Are there any other groups you would add into that mix, or is there any detail about how you like to see those kinds of groups mix that we can have as a parting bit of advice here?
Nothing else that's coming directly to mind. I feel like those are the important kind of components.
Cool. Excellent. Well, certainly components you've brought together, hopefully components that some of the listeners will be bringing together in their own projects, and hopefully they'll have been able to learn a little bit from you here today, Josh. So I know that's all we have for time, but thank you so much for being able to join us in the series.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
For more in this series, visit nlplogix.com. That's Logix with an X. An X.